December 18th, 1978, 6:17 a.m., a one-bedroom apartment in Ozone Park, Queens. Parnell Stacks Edwards was sitting at his kitchen table playing cards with his girlfriend when the door burst open. No knock, no warning. Tommy DeSimone walked in holding a .38 caliber revolver. Angelo Sepe was right behind him. Stacks looked up. He knew why they were there. DeSimone raised the gun and fired 6 shots. 5 hit Stacks in the face and chest. 1 missed and lodged in the wall. Stacks died instantly, blood pooling across the scattered playing cards. The whole hit took 11 seconds. This wasn't just another Lufthansa murder. Stacks Edwards was a professional boxer who'd sparred in Muhammad Ali's training camps. He'd fought legitimate opponents. He'd had discipline, structure, and a future. But by December 1978, he was a low-level errand boy for Jimmy Burke's crew, and he'd made one mistake. He forgot to dump a van. That mistake cost him his life at 28 years old. This is the story of how a fighter fell from Ali's world into Burke's. From boxing gyms to mob kitchens, from sparring partners to getaway drivers, from proximity to greatness to execution for incompetence. Stacks Edwards wasn't killed for betrayal. He was killed for being replaceable. But here's what Goodfellas never told you. Stacks Edwards had a real life before the mob, a legitimate career, a path out, and he walked away from all of it. Parnell Stephen Edwards was born July 19th, 1950, in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were working class. His father was a factory worker. His mother cleaned houses. Stacks grew up in Brownsville, one of the toughest neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Violence was normal. Poverty was expected. But Stacks had something most kids in Brownsville didn't have: natural athletic ability. By age 14, he was 6 feet tall, lean, fast, with quick hands and good footwork. A local trainer saw him street fighting and told him to come to the gym. Stacks started boxing at age 15. He trained at Gleason's gym in Brooklyn, one of the most respected boxing facilities in New York. Gleason's had produced champions. Muhammad Ali trained there. Joe Frazier trained there. If you could survive at Gleason's, you could fight anywhere. Stacks survived. He wasn't a star. He wasn't a future champion. But he was good enough to get noticed. By age 17, he was sparring with professional fighters. By age 19, he'd turned pro. Stacks fought as a lightweight, 135 pounds. Between 1969 and 1974, he fought 14 professional bouts. His record was 7 wins, 5 losses, 2 draws. He wasn't championship material, but he was tough. He could take a punch. He never quit. Promoters liked him because he showed up on time, fought hard, and didn't complain about purses. Trainers liked him because he was disciplined. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He trained 6 days a week. Boxing gave Stacks structure, purpose, identity. But here's where Stacks' story intersects with greatness. In the early 1970s, Muhammad Ali was training for major fights in New York and Pennsylvania. Ali's camps were chaotic operations. Dozens of sparring partners, trainers, hangers-on, reporters, and fans circulated through training facilities. Ali needed security. Not Secret Service-level protection, just big guys who could handle crowds, keep unauthorized people out, and make sure nothing disrupted training. Stacks Edwards was one of those guys. You have to understand what this role actually meant. Stacks wasn't Ali's personal bodyguard. He wasn't in Ali's inner circle. He wasn't traveling with Ali to fights or staying in the same hotels. Stacks was one of many fighters who did informal security work around training camps, standing at doors, checking credentials, moving crowds. It was grunt work, but it was legitimate work, and it put Stacks in proximity to the greatest boxer of all time. For a kid from Brownsville who'd grown up with nothing, that proximity felt like success. Later retellings would exaggerate Stacks' role. Some accounts called him Ali's bodyguard. Others suggested he was part of Ali's permanent security team. The truth is simpler. Stacks was a journeyman fighter who did occasional security work around Ali's camps. He was close enough to greatness to glimpse it, but never close enough to escape his own limits. And that gap between proximity and participation would define the rest of Stack's life. By 1975, Stack's boxing career was stalling. He was 25 years old. His record wasn't improving. He wasn't getting title fights. He wasn't making enough money to support himself. A journeyman boxer in the 1970s earned between $500 and $2,000 per fight. Stacks fought maybe 4 times a year. That's $2,000 to $8,000 annually. You couldn't live on that. Not in New York. Not with rent, food, training expenses, and medical bills from getting punched in the face for a living. Stack started missing training sessions. He stopped showing up for sparring appointments. Promoters stopped calling. By 1976, his boxing career was effectively over. And that's when the discipline that had kept Stacks focused started to erode. Without structure, without purpose, without income, Stacks began drifting. He tried to get legitimate work. He worked construction for a few months. He worked as a bouncer at nightclubs in Queens. But he wasn't built for 9-to-5 life. He'd spent 10 years training to fight, to hurt people, to survive violence. Those skills don't translate well to civilian employment. Here's where things get dark. By 1977, Stacks had developed a cocaine habit. Casual at first, recreational. But cocaine in the 1970s wasn't like it is now. It was expensive, it was addictive, and it required money Stacks didn't have. He started hanging around people who had cash, gamblers, bookies, small-time criminals. And through those connections, he ended up in Queens, at Robert's Lounge, in Jimmy Burke's world. Jimmy Burke, 46 years old in 1977, was a Lucchese crime family associate who ran hijacking and fencing operations out of Robert's Lounge in South Ozone Park. Burke was looking for muscle, guys who could drive, guys who could follow orders, guys who were expendable. Stacks Edwards fit perfectly. He was big, he was tough, he was known in the neighborhood, and most importantly, he was desperate. Burke didn't recruit Stacks because he was smart or ambitious. Burke recruited him because Stacks was available and replaceable. Burke gave Stacks small jobs at first: drive a car, pick up a package, stand at a door. Stacks wasn't part of the crew. He was hired help. But the money was good. $200 for a night's work, $500 for a weekend, $1,000 if the job was risky. For a guy who'd been earning $8,000 a year boxing, this felt like wealth. Stacks started doing regular work for Burke's crew in 1978. He ran errands, he moved stolen goods, he drove getaway cars. He was close enough to the action to feel important, but far enough from power to be disposable. And that's the position you never want to be in with men like Jimmy Burke, because the moment you become a liability, you disappear. Then came Lufthansa. December 11th, 1978. 3:17 a.m. John F. Kennedy International Airport. 6 armed men entered the Lufthansa cargo terminal and stole $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry. It was the biggest cash robbery in American history at the time. Jimmy Burke masterminded it, Tommy DeSimone executed it, Henry Hill facilitated it, and Stacks Edwards was given one job afterward, one simple, critical job. Drive the getaway van to a scrapyard in New Jersey and have it crushed immediately, within hours of the heist. The van contained fingerprints, forensic evidence, and traceable materials. If police found it, the entire crew would be exposed. This was the most important task in the post-heist cleanup, and Burke gave it to Stacks Edwards. Here's what Stacks was supposed to do. At 4:30 a.m. on December 11th, immediately after the crew left the airport, Stacks was supposed to drive the van to a scrapyard Burke controlled in Jersey City. The scrapyard owner was on the payroll. He'd be waiting. The van would be inside a compactor by 5 a.m., crushed into a cube of metal by 6 a.m., sold for scrap by the end of the week. No evidence. No investigation. No problem. Stacks' cut for the job was $10,000. All he had to do was drive 15 miles and watch a van get destroyed. Stacks didn't do it. He got high instead. After leaving the airport, Stacks drove the van to his girlfriend's apartment building in Ozone Park. He parked it on the street. He went inside. He smoked cocaine. He fell asleep. The van sat there for 3 days. On December 14th, police found it. They towed it to an impound lot. Forensic technicians processed it. They lifted fingerprints from the steering wheel, the door handles, and the gear shift. Stacks' prints were all over it. So were prints from other crew members. The FBI now had physical evidence linking the crew to Lufthansa, and it was Stacks' fault. Jimmy Burke found out on December 15th. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just made a decision. Stacks Edwards had to die, not as punishment, as housekeeping. Stacks was a loose end, and loose ends got cut. Burke told Tommy DeSimone to handle it. Tommy DeSimone, 28 years old, was Burke's most reliable killer. He'd murdered at least 6 people by December 1978. He was impulsive, violent, and efficient. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. Burke told him to kill Stacks. Tommy said okay. 3 days later, it was done. December 18th, 1978. Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Sepe drove to Stacks' apartment in Ozone Park. It was early morning. Around 6 a.m., they knew Stacks would be home. They knocked on the door. Stacks opened it. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. He'd been up all night getting high. Tommy walked in. Angelo followed. Stacks' girlfriend was sitting at the kitchen table. Tommy told her to go into the bedroom. She went. Tommy turned to Stacks. He didn't explain. He didn't give Stacks a chance to beg. He just raised the gun and fired. According to Henry Hill's later testimony, Tommy shot Stacks 6 times. 5 bullets hit Stacks in the face and upper chest. 1 missed. Stacks died instantly. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Tommy and Angelo walked out. They got in the car. They drove back to Robert's lounge. They told Burke it was done. Burke nodded. That was it. Stacks Edwards, former professional boxer, occasional security guy for Muhammad Ali's training camps, was dead at 28, executed for forgetting to dump a van. Here's what makes Stacks' death particularly tragic. He wasn't a mobster. He wasn't a career criminal. He was an athlete who lost his way, a fighter who couldn't find a fight worth having, a guy who'd briefly touched greatness and then spent the rest of his short life trying to recapture that feeling. Working for Jimmy Burke felt like being close to power again, like being important. But Stacks confused proximity with protection, and that confusion killed him. You have to understand how expendable Stacks was to Burke. In the Mafia hierarchy, there are bosses, underbosses, captains, soldiers, and associates. Stacks wasn't even an associate. He was hired help, day labor with a criminal twist. He had no family connections, no institutional protection, no leverage. If Stacks disappeared, nobody would retaliate. Nobody would investigate. Nobody would care. Burke knew that. And that's why Burke had no hesitation about killing him. But here's the thing that makes Stacks' story even sadder. He'd had options. Real options. In 1975, before his boxing career completely collapsed, a trainer offered Stacks a job working full-time at Gleason's gym, training young fighters, running the facility. It was legitimate work, steady income, a future. Stacks turned it down. He said he wasn't ready to give up on fighting yet. He wanted one more shot at a real purse. That shot never came. And by the time Stacks was ready to accept the gym job, the offer was gone. Someone else had taken it. That's the pattern with guys like Stacks. They see crime as temporary, as a way to make fast money until the real opportunity comes along. But crime has gravity. The longer you stay in, the harder it is to get out. Stacks thought he was just doing a few jobs for Burke until he got back on his feet. But there's no getting back on your feet when you're working for men like Jimmy Burke. There's only getting deeper in, until you're too deep to climb out, until the only way out is a bullet. After Stacks' murder, the crew moved on. Burke kept killing. Martin Krugman disappeared in January 1979, strangled and dismembered. Richard Eaton was shot. Joe Manry was found in a dumpster. Teresa Ferrara's body was found in a car trunk. Tommy DeSimone himself vanished in January 1979. The Gambinos killed him for murdering Maid member Ronald Jarutha without permission. By March 1979, 6 people connected to Lufthansa were dead. Stax was just the first. Stax's funeral was small. His mother was there, his girlfriend, a few guys from the old boxing gyms. Nobody from Burke's crew attended. They'd already forgotten him. Stax was buried in a cemetery in Brooklyn, not far from where he grew up. There's no famous headstone, no memorial, just a grave marker with his name and dates. July 19th, 1950 to December 18th, 1978. 28 years old. But here's what's important about Stax Edwards' story. It's not about the Lufthansa heist. It's about the path that led him there. Stax wasn't born a criminal. He was born an athlete. He had discipline. He had potential. He was good enough to spar with champions, good enough to work around Muhammad Ali, good enough to have a legitimate career. But when that career stalled, when the money dried up, when the structure disappeared, Stax made a choice. He could struggle in poverty doing honest work, or he could make fast money doing dirty work. He chose fast money, and it killed him. This is the part of mob stories nobody talks about. The guys on the bottom, the expendable ones, the hired help, guys like Stax Edwards who weren't mobsters. They were desperate men who got used by mobsters. They didn't have family connections. They didn't have protection. They didn't have power. They just had need. And men like Jimmy Burke exploited that need. They gave guys like Stax just enough money to keep them hooked, just enough responsibility to make them feel important, and just enough exposure to make them liabilities. Stax thought he was working for the mob. He wasn't. He was working for Jimmy Burke. And Jimmy Burke was using him like you'd use a disposable razor, useful for one job, thrown away when it's dull. Stax's mistake wasn't forgetting to dump the van. His mistake was thinking he mattered to people who saw him as a tool. You can't build loyalty with a hammer. You just use it until it breaks. Then you get another one. Here's the legacy of Stax Edwards. He's a footnote in the Lufthansa story, a minor character in Goodfellas. Samuel L. Jackson played him in the movie, got killed in a famous scene. But Jackson's performance made Stax seem like a screw-up, a junkie who couldn't follow simple instructions. That's not who Stax really was. Stax was a professional fighter, a disciplined athlete, a guy who'd worked around greatness. He didn't fail because he was incompetent. He failed because he was addicted, desperate, and in over his head. And here's what nobody asks. Why did Burke give the most important post-heist job to a drug addict? Burke knew Stax was using cocaine. He knew Stax was unreliable. So why trust him with the getaway van? The answer is simple. Burke didn't trust him. Burke expected him to fail. And when Stax failed, Burke had an excuse to kill him. Because Stax knew too much. He knew the crew. He knew the plan. He knew where the money went. As long as Stax was alive, he was a potential witness, a potential informant, a potential problem. The van was just an excuse. That's how men like Jimmy Burke operate. They set you up to fail. They give you a job you can't handle, and when you screw up, they kill you and call it consequences. Stax never had a chance. He was dead the moment he got involved with Lufthansa. Burke just needed a reason. But here's the question nobody can answer. What would have happened if Stax had dumped the van? Would Burke have let him live? Probably not. Stax was still a liability. He still knew too much. He was still expendable. Burke killed Martin Krugman, even though Krugman did everything right. He killed Joe Manry, even though Manry never talked. He killed his own crew members because paranoia doesn't care about competence. It only cares about control. And the only way to control someone completely is to kill them. Stax Edwards was a fighter who couldn't find a fight worth winning, a guy who'd briefly touched greatness and spent the rest of his life chasing that feeling. He thought working for Jimmy Burke was another way to be close to power, to be important, to matter. But criminal organizations don't work like boxing gyms. In boxing, if you work hard, you get better. You earn respect. You build a career. In crime, hard work just makes you useful. And useful people are the first ones to get killed. because they know too much, and dead men can't testify. Stax Edwards died face down on a kitchen floor in Queens, shot 6 times by a man he thought was his friend, for a mistake he made while high on cocaine, working for a crew that never valued him, chasing money he'd never spend for a heist he barely participated in. He was 28 years old. He'd been a professional boxer. He'd sparred with champions. He'd worked around Muhammad Ali. And he ended up as a cautionary tale about desperation, addiction, and the disposable men who work at the bottom of organized crime. That's the real story of Stax Edwards, not the screw-up from Goodfellas, the fighter who lost his way, the athlete who traded discipline for fast money, the guy who thought proximity to power was the same as having power. It's not. And Stax learned that lesson 6 seconds too late. If you found this story revealing, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. Do you think Stax ever had a real chance, or was he always destined to end up dead the moment he walked into Robert's lounge? Let us know. This is Mafia Talks. Untold stories from the world of organized crime. Until next time.